my name is Nigel Asquith. I'm currently at the Kennedy School at Harvard, but most of my life I actually live and work in Bolivia. So I'm going to be talking about a randomized controlled trial we've been set up. But I'll start with the story. Where I work, a national park called Ambaró, 10% of the birds on planet Earth. That's more bird species than the entire country of Costa Rica, by the way. So we have it all in one park. Then we also, that park gives water for about 2 million people, which is about half the population of Costa Rica. So again, this is quite an important place for conservation, for importance for people. One of a standard person in this type of park, this lady is Mrs. Rojas Peña. She lives downstream from the park. She's very dependent on what happens upstream the park and just outside the park of Ambaró. The water comes from the park and from the forest outside the park. That water comes in the stream, and she can wash the vegetables. And her husband is a agriculturalist. This fellow, Serafin Carrasco, who I've now known for most of my professional life, I suppose, 12 years. Serafin's my life story has been tied up with Serafin. He lives upstream. He owns land. He wants to cut it down to basically free up land for agriculture. But Mrs. Rojas Peña gets really upset when he does that because that reduces water flow. And so they historically they've had literally they've come to blows over it. So that's the context in which we first went into this region in 2003 and basically tried to set up what we then called, because all the economists told us to, payment for environmental services scheme. But in the 10 years since we've been doing this, we've come to the conclusion that that's actually not the way to think about the context, the way to frame what we're doing. And I really appreciated Aaron's talk where he's saying that 68% of people, I think, in Costa Rica joined the scheme for intrinsic environmental reasons, or that they mention that. And I think we're finding very much that the people in our schemes, that's why they're entering. The payment is just I've often said I think we cover people's opportunity costs of going to meetings to talk in the community about conservation. That's all we cover. But because our payments are very, very low, but I think we can end up doing conservation a lot cheaper, perhaps because we're thinking it a different way. And before I go into the RCT design, I want to give you a little more of this history, a little more of the context and the story. So this is the basic design of our water funds. NGO comes in, municipal government, water cooperative, all agree, yes, we want to protect the upper watershed. We don't make payments, we figure out what the upstream people want in terms of development projects. Bee boxes, beehives, fruit tree seedlings, barbed wire to enclose their parcels of land, helps with land tenure just in Costa Rica, improved seed for pasture. So it's never payments, it's a thing. Stuff, I call it to non-technical people. So the stuff we give, then they sign a contract saying we're not going to cut our forest down. So again, as I go, is this payments for environmental services? We think it's much more about reciprocity. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. And so here you see these two fellows aren't engaging in an economic transaction here. You've got Antonio Gutierrez, who's receiving a bee box, tools on how to produce honey from the guy who is the manager of the downstream electricity cooperative. They need one of these hydroelectric power comes out of the streams. And so my question, and we wrestled with this for years, is kind of neoclassical economics the best way, the models of neoclassical economics are the best way to conceptualize, to think through how these schemes may best work. And do people fill these basic criteria? No. And that's fine, because none of us do, and we all use economics as how we live our lives. But are there better models? We've concluded, yes, there are. This shows my economic knowledge, though. I get my economic quotes from New York Times bestsellers. We all know Dan Ariely. But the crucial thing is money, as it turns out, is probably the most expensive way to motivate people. Social norms are not only cheaper, but often more effective. And that's something that while you read it in Ariely's and other behavioral economists' work, it's something, maybe because I'm stupid, it's taken me 5, 6, 7 years to figure this out. That in our schemes, we're now calling them reciprocity agreements because we're basically providing tokens of appreciation rather than economic transactions. Right. And also, if we think behavioral economics is what's driving people as opposed to necessarily classical economic theory, you add in a level of institutional needs, what people need for institutions, how they manage their institutions. And so what we think is a much more useful framework to conceptualize and think about and design these schemes is reciprocity, behavioral economics, and governing the commons, the design criteria. But once we do that, this is a water bill from someone who lives downstream. In 2007, they voted to increase their water bill by 10%. This money then goes to buy stuff to go upstream. This is the annual report of the water cooperative. You don't need to read it, but the crucial thing here is you see that the water cooperative there and the local government are putting in about 80% of the money to fund these schemes. So they're beginning to get really quite developed in terms of sustainability. There you see how we as an institution have developing these schemes from 2004 to 2010. That's the number of hectares in these RWAs, reciprocal watershed agreements. We spent 3, 4, 5 years figuring out how to do the model, replicated a number of places, figured out how to improve it, make it better. By the time we get to 2011, we're getting pretty good at it. We can do it quite quickly, going into municipalities, explaining the concept, getting buy-in, getting local support, and within 11 months we've actually signed the deal, made the agreement, and given compensation to families for protecting, in this case, about 2,000 hectares of forest. The 54 families in Quavo got barbed wire and staples and signed a contract. 11 months it took us from first entry into the community. And again, the interesting thing there is we have about 60% of that fund is locally sourced within 11 months. So we think we're getting pretty good at it. We're now in 21 municipalities across Bolivia, 50,000 hectares, 55,000 hectares under conservation. It's now spread through colleagues at other institutions around Latin America. There's another 15,000 hectares under conservation in these other areas, in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. And we're really helping the Bolivian government as they negotiate at the UNFCCC alternatives to RED, non-market approaches to RED. The Bolivians are really pushing, as some of you probably know, that RED markets are not necessarily the solution for everything. We should think about non-markets, and that's now entering the dialogue. So we have a whole bunch of people, they've got their stuff, they've got bee boxes, they've got tree seedlings, they've got barbed wire, they're signing contracts, they're feeling very happy with themselves. We think that's having a development impact. People volunteering entering the scheme. We're expanding to a whole bunch of other countries. We've got 70,000 hectares under conservation. We're all pretty happy with ourselves. This is the one. I hesitate to show the next slide. Okay, I will do. We didn't do propensity match scoring. We didn't do anything that you good economists do. But there's two reasons to show this slide. That with a basic, really basic analysis, which probably is totally wrong, you see that in the municipality of Quidusías, the entire municipality, we've got 20,000 hectares of forest. The deforestation rate for the municipality this time period was 0.78%. In the areas we're working, it's 0.26%. That analysis is not very good, but for two reasons I tell you that is one, this gives you a sense of how good my team is, the quality of my research. So I'm really looking for people to work with us and do better analysis and better think through how to actually measure impact. And then, of course, the most important thing that this slide tells us is we realized after thinking we're doing such a great job on actually achieving these conservation impacts, these development impacts, we've got people replicating all over Latin America, we're having a policy impact, that, we actually do need to stop and take a reality check and think if actually we are doing a good job or not. Which is why we said to ourselves, we need to do an RCT. We took this decision in about 2010, we started thinking about it. And basically we have, to tell you part of the end of the story, before I tell the story, we've transformed our little crappy Bolivian NGO into a research institution, which has been a huge challenge. But again, as we'll see at the end of the story, it's been a fascinating and really profitable exercise, regardless of whether we do an RCT or not. We've turned our inefficient gut feeling, let's just go out there and do some good stuff into an institution that really asks questions every day about how we're doing it, are we doing it well, and can we do it better? Which I think is an unexpected side benefit of deciding we were going to do this RCT. But anyway, because we don't really know what we're doing, we went to the experts at Innovations for Poverty Action, got some of those people to join in our scheme, and then of course the JPAL. A couple of our management team took the course at JPAL at MIT on how to do the randomized controlled trials, the theory behind it, the whole statistical complications. And we said, well, that's all very nice, we can't do it, so we need some JPAL people to work with us. There's a couple of people listed there now at Ashraf. But really, I have to recognize my total colleague, Kelsey Jack, who's our real, keeps us honest in terms of thinking about the economics. So a lot of the economics and the thinking through the design of all this is Kelsey's. She was Harvard PhD, MIT postdoc, and now she's actually at Tufts. So Kelsey's our economic guru, and basically we work with the JPAL people to try and design this RCT. These are people funding it. It's very important to realize that, again, we've really split how we do this, and I think this is a very useful lesson, that we've had kind of conservation development funding from USAID and the European Union. We've then got ESPA funding, which is Ecosystem Services for Poverty Alleviation, which is British government funding to actually fund the research side of things. And so we piggyback the research funding onto the existing implementation funding. And then we've gone to IPA, JPAL, and Harvard, and our hydrologist comes from the Universidad Nacional in Colombia. So we're basically bringing a mix of different institutions with different expertise to the table to actually do this well. And because we have no idea about this lot of stuff, we've basically gone to the people who do know what they're doing. So, why do we do that? First thing was, we were in a very fortunate situation in 2008, having helped create a new, best way to call it is a biosphere reserve. It doesn't have that status, but a biosphere reserve type place. It's 734,000 hectares, 5 municipalities, about 3,000 families living within the area, and 135 communities. And we helped basically the state government of Santa Cruz create this area. And because we were kind of the only game in town with funding, we were then able to say, okay, we've got this funding from the European Commission to do a development project, a conservation project in the region. So how about we hold off a minute and let's think about how to turn this into a RCT of this intervention. So the idea was to do what, going back to my story at the start, these reciprocal watershed agreements, getting upstream people to conserve their land for a compensation payment of staff, and then we'll see what impact that has on biodiversity, water quality, forest cover, and socioeconomic status. So again, with our colleagues at Harvard and JPAL, we designed a socioeconomic survey, and we tested it in a bunch of areas around the protected area, not in the protected area. We had various iterations to improve the survey. We then applied it to, the idea was every single family in the protected area, so that's 3,000 families. We've since found out a couple of people keep popping up here we didn't account for. But the idea, this isn't a sample, this is a census, every single family in 135 communities, 130 communities. We then got water quality data, so that's fecal coliforms, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, temperature, within, above, and below every single community in the protected area. Same thing for biodiversity data. We used amphibians and dung beetles as proxies for biodiversity. In the forests above every community where they get their water, we checked for those, we did biodiversity, abundance and diversity surveys, and for aquatic macroinvertebrates as well. So those are our proxies for biodiversity. We've got forest cover, rapid eye images from 2010, 2011 right now with 5 meter resolution. So we've got all those data to start us off. Then the next point I want to make to you guys, we now have an incredible data set which can just be mined. So this is a PhD from student from Pittsburgh. Maria Recalde came in and just did a totally, well, not unrelated research, but taking advantage of the fact we have 3,000 people surveyed and all their attitudes to environmental issues, how many kids they have, everything. So and again, please you guys, anyone who's interested in using this data set, it's out there, it's public. Or it's public to be used as long as we can coordinate. So then we said, well, we've got all this scheme set up. Then became the moment of truth. These two fellows are the local mayors, Castro Romero and Noel Rojas. Castro is the mayor of Valle Grande, which is the biggest municipality. So we, at this point, had to say to Castro, you know, how about we randomize where we're going to do this intervention? And we hadn't discussed this with anyone at this point. So the question is, how do we convince the local authorities and the local people that randomization is a fair and way to now decide who gets the project? Going back to Adrian's point about, is it ethical to randomize? So basically we went to the mayors and local town councils and said, hey, we've got this project. You already know what we do because we've done a couple of pilots in each municipality. We've been doing this for 5-6 years around you. We'd love to do these reciprocal watershed agreements within your entire municipality. We're ready to go, but we don't have enough money to do it all. So, Mr. Mayor, where should we do it? Well, we could do it in your community, but that's not really fair, and all the councils get upset at you. We could do it in the poorest communities, but then everyone's poor. And we ummed and ahed, and we all had this big discussion with the town councillors. Then we said innocently, well, how about randomising? And everyone said, what a great idea, we'll do that. So it was actually remarkably straightforward. That there was a moment of truth, one of the big moments of truth in this whole 5-year process when you're, oh my God, this whole thing dies or survives on this moment, and unfortunately it worked well. So once we'd randomized, we decided which 65 communities we stratified by community size, municipality, and the number of cattle in the community, because we found those were communities divided by those criteria. We then designed the compensation schemes, and again, this literally took 2 years to figure out what was the most appropriate way to define a compensation scheme which would allow us to look at impact. So the first level contract, everyone who signs up for the first level contract is 100 meters either side of the stream, because water quality is what we're interested in. That's where the cattle are, that's where the biodiversity is, that's where people want to put their cattle and cut the forest. So we said 10 meters either side of the river, you cannot cut your forest down and you can't have cattle in there, and we will enforce this contract. Anyone who wants to sign up for that gets $100 worth of stuff up front. That stuff is barbed wire or plastic tubing to allow you to take water away from the stream and build a trough for your cows to drink that. You've got to keep cattle out of here. If you can agree you keep cattle out of here, we'll sign up this contract. $100 worth of stuff to help you do that, and then $10 per hectare per year for the 3 years that you're in the contract. If you want to sign up but you can't keep cattle out, you don't get the stuff and you get $3 a hectare. And then the catch-all, the third level contract, is basically saying, look, the problem is very few people in these villages live close to the stream. So if we want to get social buy-in, we need to get everyone in. So we said anyone else who wants to put any forest in can level 3, but that's only $1 a hectare per year. So a lot of people sign up for that. That keeps everyone happy. Everyone feels they're benefiting. Probably we're not going to learn a lot about PES or these reciprocal watershed agreement deals, because anyone can sign up whatever land they like. It's probably not an issue. But that doesn't matter if it's only $1 a hectare. Okay, so again, going back to this point of how I think we've improved as an institution. We used to go to people and say, hey, sign up for the scheme, it's really cool. And they say, come back tomorrow and talk to me. So we go back tomorrow. But now, because we're doing it exactly the same in all the communities, we have to mechanize. So now we go in 2 days ahead of time, we call the village chief and say, okay, we're coming to community this time, this day, everyone come to have a meeting. We offer the intervention, just the 3 things I talked to you. We then offer the intervention day 1. Then we say, okay guys, we're coming 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Anyone who wants to sign up, be there, and we'll go out and measure your land. If you don't want to sign up, that's fine. We'll see you in 6 months. So anyone who signs up second day, we go out, measure their land, they sign up, and our guy in the field right then with his GPS can do a quick calculation. Oh, it looks like you have about 3.6 hectares. So what do you want for that? You want bee boxes, you want barbed wire, they make a plan of what they want. We then send those data back to the office. We do the map. Oh, it turns out it doesn't have 3.6 hectares, it has 3.54 hectares. That deserves this amount of bee boxes or whatever. I'm going to have to go on a little longer, but I've got 30 minutes. Sorry. So we find exactly what he's going to get. We buy the stuff, sign the contract, and on day 7, he's getting his stuff and he's got his compensation payments. You sign the contract for 7 days from first thing to get his stuff. So it's like, wow, that's amazing. So then we monitor annually and we evaluate ongoing. And that's where it gets interesting. So just as a quick, I will try and hurry up. This, for example, one of the phases, we go out every 6 months and offer this again to the same people in the same 65 randomly located communities. For example, this was June 2012, 674 families we talked to. Of those, 187 said, yes, we want to join the scheme. Of those, 168 were new. 19 had already signed up for a different piece of land, getting it on a different contract, and we put various hectares in. But the really nice thing is this is my database of who's signing up. And so, for example, we get this fellow, you can't read it, but neither can I. Owen Bruno, he's signed up for level 1 contract, put 0.27 hectares in, he's going to get 10 Japanese mandarin trees, etc., etc. But the cool thing is, he's got a unique ID number. And then our computer back in Cambridge, Massachusetts, has everything we ever wanted to know about this guy. More data on him than the NSA has. How old he is, what his kids do, what he thinks about the environment, how far it is to the market, etc., etc. So we maintain anonymity by only using numbers, but we know everything about everyone who's entering. And that tells us all about it. So, again, I'm data mining here, sorry. This because we're really early on in this data collection process. Who's entering? So we know. Turns out that 80% of the general population own their own house, 90% of the people entering own their houses. And you can see those, I've data mined here, I've said where are the difference between the population, general population, and who's entering. I think that the most interesting ones for me is finding out that it turns out everyone who's had a role on the village council or represented the village before, far more likely to enter the PS scheme than the average population. So, across the entire region, by the end of this year, we've got 995 contracts, 608 families, 38,000 hectares under conservation. However, the ones we're really interested in for the research, which is the level 1 contracts where we think we're going to be additional, it's 504 contracts, 476 families, 65 communities, and 1,770 hectares. We're monitoring 235 of those contracts. That is a contract, again, really important. It's 2 pages, really simple language, nothing complicated. The crucial things we're showing is it's level 1 contract, it's for 3 years, this is the stuff you get out of it, we're not going to take your land away, and 3 people have signed this. Natura-Bolivia, the landowner, and the municipality, actually there's another person who signed, the village chief. Why is that important? Because the village chief, it says here, well you won't read it, but in the if you don't comply with this contract, we will take your stuff back. But it won't go to us, the outsiders. It'll go to the village. So we figured out how to get some level of social pressure. One thing we're really worried about is this remotely additional. Remember, there's different level of contracts. Of the people who have signed up, how many have cattle? For the first level contract, the worst case scenario would be we're saying 100 meters either side of the river, you've got to keep cattle out. It'd be terrible for me if the only people who signed up for that would be the people who didn't have cattle. So this was another moment of truth. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh, it turns out 87% of the people who promised to keep cattle out of the lands where the cattle are going in right now to drink, 87% of people have cattle. So that's good. It suggests we're getting additional. I'm not going to go into the monitoring too much, but basically we have quite a complicated monitoring system. This goes to compliance, which basically says after the first year of the people in that high level contract of you've got to keep cattle out, we monitored 88 people. About 50% have complied fully, and about 45% were getting there, and about 5% were really terrible. But the interesting thing is when we went to monitor and said to everybody, okay, we're back to monitor, they're like, what? Yeah, we're going to monitor. But so a big thing was they just didn't expect anybody to go back and monitor. And you can see that after the second year of the contracts, a lot of those people who are really bad, they just shut up to 100% compliance. So the act of monitoring has shown people were serious, and that people are now complying a lot better. One interesting, the people down here, this is an interesting group, who were at 100% compliance and have dropped down to 70 points. I won't go into the details, I can do it later. How can it be that people have dropped their compliance? Turns out these three people have left the land. They've gone to the city for various reasons, because they got sick or whatever. So the act of leaving their land has left them abandoned. Other people's cows have come in. So that was kind of a surprise. But then the other interesting thing is, of the contracts that were signed a year later, immediately after a year it's gone up to 85% compliance. So the word maybe got around that actually this is serious. People have to comply, which again is interesting. In terms of costs, I won't go into details. The lines are different municipalities. What you can see here, interestingly, is these are my costs as I go on and do a wave of implementation of the scheme. So I go out, I've got my car in front of me, my office behind me. Those are already covered costs. I've got to pay fuel, salaries, costs of the stuff we give out, etc., etc. We're ending up at about $3 per hectare per year total cost of this deal, of which $1.76 on average goes to each landowner per hectare. So more than 2/3, no, it's not quite 2/3, about 2/3 of our costs are actually going to landowners. And then the other interesting point about this, because I told you across our institution, we're getting about 70-80% of these schemes funded locally. In this case, we decided not to ask the municipal governments for this at this stage, because we were trying to do an RCT. We wanted to make sure we could do it scientifically well. So we designed it all without asking for that local counterpart. We just used donor funds. But now we've said, okay, guys, it's all sorted. You need to put some money in. So we've gone up from, where is it? We've gone up from this line, 13% of the total costs are now covered by the municipalities. That's the first year that it covered anything. So 2 more slides, then I'm done. Again, these are people who funded it. To give you a sense of total costs, we got an IPA grant that actually came from Gates originally. Harvard's put in $40,000. I'm not sure of these numbers, because there's a lot of mixing of funds goes on in NGO. But I think it's probably fair to say the whole design of this, setting it up, 3 years of doing this, is about $300,000, which still is pretty cheap. It's not quite as cheap as 300, but 300,000 is our total design costs. And then, as I say, we're now $3 a hectare per year, all included. So what we think is pretty cheap. Final slide, my Barcelona Declaration. Sorry. What I'm talking about, these PSA schemes that are private ones, that are the local ones. Our 10 years of experience suggests that it may actually be more useful to think about institutional and social capital needs for governing the commons, the precautionary principle and behavioural economic theory, as opposed to payments for a service and assuming everyone reacts just to the economic incentives. The other big thing we've learned is you've got to study, monitor, evaluate, and architect the details of your program as you're going along. Doesn't make any sense to think through it all ahead of time. It's got to be adaptive management, but also it doesn't help to figure out at the end what you've done wrong. It's got to be adaptive as you go on. And we made mistakes after mistakes after mistakes, and the crucial thing is to learn from them. And I think that's one of all our research money, all our studies are in the RCT. It's not figuring out how to do it ahead of time. It's all in the RCT. Then what we found, and I think this is fascinating, the RCT can be remarkably inexpensive. And now we're at a point where we know how to do it. It's just nothing, the cost. We've done all the upfront thinking ahead of time. And as I said, we've had incredible co-benefits within our institution. We've turned our institution, or my team, into like this machine. 5 guys, 3 months, 17,000 hectares under contract. Is that insane or what? And they're actually, these RCTs are actually not that difficult to design and implement. If we can do it, anyone can. We're not that good. We haven't got a bunch of economists with it. We've got some great people we collaborate with, but it's not that complicated. Especially as now we know how to do it. And I think that, the funding to do this is all public. Our responsibility is to let everybody else know how to do it as well. So anyone who wants to work with us on this, great. Anywhere else in the world, we have funds to do another RCT a little further to the south. And so we're going to do that. But we do need to bridge this researcher practitioner gap, and I'm here, and I have 2 seconds for questions. 1, 0.